Alright, greetings ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first of many videos about Hearthstone card changes, patches that have happened in the past that if you haven't been around since the very beginning of Hearthstone, you may not be aware of the history, so to speak, of some of those cards. Now, I'll be going over, there'll be many episodes, I'll be covering one class per episode, then a bunch of neutral ones. You wouldn't believe the amount of changes. The reason I'm doing this is because there are a lot, some classes obviously have gone through a lot more changes, and I don't want to make one bulky video with 70 minutes of patch changes. So I'll put them into digestible bits, each class in one little video. We're gonna start with Druid, the very first class that I want to tackle. Druid is, if you're not aware, one of the classes that has changed probably, I want to say the most, at least as far as what Blizzard intended for the class very initially. So, the first card that we're going to be looking at is one that has been removed from the game. The card in question is Demoralizing Roar, a 1-mana spell that reduces the attack, that is, of all the enemy minions for 1 turn by 3. That usually means if I have a board already established in some way, let's assume me and my opponent both have a board equally strong. If I play this, I get to trade all my 3/2s away in his 3/2s, and I get nothing to lose. He loses all his minions, I lose none of mine, and this gives me a massive snowball very early, which leads to really sick Savage Roars much earlier than otherwise anticipated. So, Demoralizing Roar, is it a good card? I would venture to say, in a token Druid deck, probably. I'm not too sure in general how it would perform, but at 1 mana, that feels like a pretty big discount, because if you play, let's say, a minion-heavy Druid deck, even the current Druid decks with Innervate and whatnot, and, Paladin Shredders, if that were to exist, you could get trades on Belchers without losing anything. You could get so much value out of a 1-mana spell. So, the fact that it's been removed, I can't, we never really got around to playing with it, with decks that exist the way they do now, but back in the days, that got cut, that is, and I'm not too sure what replaced it. There weren't any substitutions made for Demoralizing Roar as far as I'm aware, unless maybe Naturalize took its place, but there was a Naturalize change very early in the game. So Naturalize, obviously at the moment, 1 mana, destroy a minion, your opponent draws 2 cards. The initial version of this, a long time ago, was 2 mana, and we used to think, you know what, it's actually worth it because you killed something and you get 2 card draws, and then we tried it out, and it really didn't perform nearly as well as we wanted at 2 mana back in the alpha, back when we played on a simulator. We weren't playing on Hearthstone, the game wasn't even remotely out, nobody had access to the client, at least not legit, so we played on Cockatrice, and at 2 mana, Naturalize was horrendous, and at 1 mana, it's still not amazing outside of Druid mill decks, so this is a change that happened, and it still hasn't increased the playability of Naturalize and Constructed outside of very specific niche archetypes. 2 mana. Now, the next change is one that you will be perhaps, a bit surprised. You won't be surprised, that is. It's on Force of Nature, which used to be a 5-mana spell instead of a 6-mana spell. So what that means is, the turn 9 combo nowadays where people play Force of Nature and then they follow it up with an amazingly convenient Savage Roar, so they get 3 Treants on the board, and they charge your face for a total of 14 damage, including their hero's attack, so you take a lot of damage for 9 mana. It used to be 8 mana. Now, you'd be like, this is a big deal, but it's not that big of a deal. And I'd grant it to you. I would venture to say Force of Nature at 5 mana was fine. The problem is, in my opinion, Savage Roar. Savage Roar is the biggest offender. Force of Nature, not so much. So what they did, instead of changing Savage Roar, is they changed Force of Nature, which as a result means that now Savage Roar is still causing potential design problems down the line, but Force of Nature was obscene back then for one simple reason. The other tools the Druids had were way over the top. This is the old Force of Nature Savage Roar for 8 mana, which was pretty crazy, but that was not it. Druids used to have Druid of the Claw, which instead of being what you know it as now, a 5-mana 4/4 that you can make a 4/6 with Taunt, 4/6 with Taunt is good, or you give it a 4/4 with Charge. It used to be the case that this guy could be a 4/7 with Taunt. That might not look like much, but at 5 mana, we're talking a stat line the likes of Fugan and Stalag, right? A Fugan, 5-mana 4/7, and it has Taunt, baseline. You don't have to, and you can't silence it off. You can silence off the taunt, but you can't silence the 3 extra health that it gets. So Druid of the Claw was very much insane, and it made Ancient of War look like utter trash, because Ancient of War is not a bad card, but if I can get myself a 4/7 with Taunt for 5 mana, do I have any real incentive to push for Ancient of War? Sure, in a ramp deck, that would be the case, but back then, ramp wasn't even remotely relevant, right? And nobody really played ramp Druid, because the other tools that Druids had were just much better, and we're gonna get into them. Between Force of Nature at 5 mana and what's coming up, you're going to be mind blown. So, another card that Druid had that was very different from what it is now, Claw. This is, well, very different. It was different. 1 mana, give your hero +2 attack and 2 armor. Pretty standard, pretty boring in fact, but still pretty solid. Now we have the older Claw, which was give your hero +3 attack this turn. So a 1 mana 3 damage removal. So it could act as a Wrath, as removal. The thing is, back then, nobody used Claw as minion removal. Everybody used it to go face. Now that might surprise you if you haven't been around, if you weren't around back then, but Druids were the masters of face damage because everything they had hit face. Claw used to give you 3 attacks, so that was 3 damage already guaranteed. Bite, which you already know nowadays as a 4 mana spell that gives you +4 attack and 4 armor, not the worst, used to be a 4 mana spell that gave you 6 attack this turn. So you see where I'm getting at here. Bite used to give you 6 damage to the face, to the opponent, and you could use Claw for 1 more mana to go up to 9, so 2 cards together dealt 9 damage. You know, that sounds crazy, right? That's not over. This is just the start. Now, Bite went through 2 iterations before it settled on what it is now, which is 4 attack, 4 armor. It was changed to a 3 mana spell with the exact same effect, so it was 3 mana, 4 attack, 4 armor. Then Blizzard realized, wait, we're still feeding into the same issue where for very little mana, they can get a huge amount of damage output, so they reverted it, or rather they put it up to 4 and changed the ability to what it is nowadays. So Bite went through 3 iterations, the first one being obscenely heavy damage-wise, not so much for the armor, as you might imagine, but it was a crazy card. Now, the reason Claw and Bite were so broken is not because Claw and Bite are crazy in and of themselves. I mean, those cards are pretty fine, and the damage that they dealt back in the days was pretty crazy, but it wasn't, it was over the top. But it wasn't game-winning in and of itself, because you could still get out-tempoed on the board, right? That seems to make sense. Except, you really couldn't. This is what you know as savagery nowadays. 1 mana, deal damage equal to your hero's attack to a minion. So that's pretty crappy, right? You use Claw, you get +2 attack, and then you play savagery, and you deal 2 damage to a minion. So you spend a card slot that has to be comboed with something else, and it deals with 1 minion that it just doesn't feel too good. Yeah, well, the initial savagery would have given you a run for your money, because that thing was crazy. It used to be a 2 mana spell. You dealt damage equal to your hero's attack to all enemy minions. So just picture this. I have a Bite. Gives me +6 attack. I have a savagery. I have 6 attack. I play Bite. I attack your face for 6, because why not? And then I savagery your entire board off. I got a better Flame Strike, 2 damage over Flame Strike for 6 mana instead of 7, and I got to hit your face for 6, because it didn't consume the Bite, right? It didn't consume it the way Blade Flurry operates. So savagery used to be effectively a Blade Flurry. That is how it functioned. For Druids, back when they had a Bite that dealt 6 and a Claw that dealt 3, sometimes people would go Bite, Claw, Savagery on turn 7, deal 9 damage to all enemy minions, and attack face for 9, which was just ridiculous. So, Savagery was then changed because it was absolutely obscene. It was changed to a second version, which was 3 mana with the exact same effect. Somehow Blizzard thought, if we change the mana cost and bump it by 1, it won't be nearly as broken. It was, so they had to change it to the crappy version of Savagery that we have nowadays. So we lost the AoE capacity of Savagery, which I think is really unfortunate. I've made a video about potential, card changes that could be done to change maybe useless cards, and Savagery could benefit from being a cleave ability, like the Warrior's Cleave, where you could play Bite and Savagery together, and you could play, you could hit 2 minions for 4, but you have to play both cards together on turn 5, and at least you'd get some kind of interesting value out of it, whereas nowadays Savagery is a non-existent card. So Blizzard killed it, and they gave basically Savagery as the Blade Flurry we know nowadays to rogues. Now, that seems crazy to you, right? A lot of face damage, a lot of board wipes, a crazy Druid Claw, right? It's not over. We're not getting there. Later in the game, in closed beta, I believe, unless I'm mistaken, might have been closed or open, but Druids got another change affecting them, which had to do with Wrath. Wrath, you know now as a very straightforward card. Deal 3 damage to a minion, or 1 damage to a minion and draw a card. Back in the olden Hearthstone days, this could be used to deal 3 damage or 1 damage and draw a card. What's the difference, you say? Oh, you mean it doesn't have to hit a minion? That's right. That's right, you did not have to hit a minion. You could punch the enemy's face for 3 damage. This was a Dark Bomb. That's basically what it was, a mix of Dark Bomb and Shiv in 1 card for Druids back in the day. And then he changed it to where you could only hit minions, and suddenly Druids' phase damage was slightly reduced, at least their reach was. So between Claw at 3 attack, Bite at 6 attack, Wrath at 3, Swipe that hits for 4, you were looking at a lot of obscene phase damage from Druids, and Force of Nature Savage Roar on top of that. But that was not it. That was not it. Starfall also was a thing. You know Starfall now, deal 5 damage to a minion or 2 damage to all enemy minions. The old Starfall was deal 5 damage to an enemy or 2 damage to all the enemies, including the enemy hero. So I could Starfall your face for 5. So back then a very typical Druid deck looked something like this. And I kid you not. You played 2 Starfalls, 2 Starfires, you played 2 Force of Nature, which were at 5 mana back then. You had the 2 Savage Roars, which you could play 2 Savagery, Bite, you had Claw, Druid of the Claws, obviously, which were completely crazy. You played the Innervates, you played the 2 Wraths, you even played Moonfire and some variants of Druid, which attempted to make it even more aggressive. Played 2 Swipes, 2 Keepers of the Grove, and I mean, pick your choice for the rest. People played 2 Ancients of Lore because they were broken as well. So that was a typical Druid deck. Like, that was a typical Druid deck. All spells, all face, never stop, just go. You think Hunter is obnoxious, or the current Force of Nature Druid deck is obnoxious? It is not. It is absolutely fine compared to what it used to be, but that's not it. Ancient of Lore what was also different than what it is. You see it now as a 7 mana 5/5, you choose one, you draw 2 cards, or you restore 5 health. Well, it used to be 7 mana 5/5, draw 2 cards, or restore 8 health. 8 health. You could get a healing touch on legs if need be, so that's basically an antique heal bot, right? Let's agree on that. The antique heal bot does pretty much that, but you could also heal other minions if you wanted to. You could heal your face, or you could draw cards, which is what most people tended to do, because anyway, you wanted to fetch for those Force of Nature Savage Roar to finish off your opponent, which made the entire Druid arsenal a bit on the idiotic side. As far as balance was concerned, I think Druid was way over the top. There's also a minor change that would make the scenarios, which made it go from 9 mana to 8 mana, from 8 mana that is to 9 mana. It's a minor change, but then again, it's also a very impactful one, because there's a huge difference in tempo between, you know, an 8 mana Ysera and a 9 mana Ysera. Huge difference there. And scenarios being bumped up also reduce the potential Savage Roar, Force of Nature shenanigans the Druid could pull off. So it got a little better as time passed, but overall, Druids were beyond obscene. So that's it for the Druid card changes that occurred up until now. Obviously, more might happen in the future. For the time being, though, this is what we've got. And if you can only imagine what Druid was like back in the days, you're probably very much happy that they've been changed the way they have. So until the next class review, I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and take care of yourselves. As usual, may the fun and the luck be with you.